This is Julie, the Cancer Dietitian. Thanks to a grant from the Colon Cancer Coalition, we're doing a 6-part series on colon cancer. This is episode 2, and we're discussing nutrition and physical activity recommendations for cancer risk reduction and survivorship. And we'll hear from someone in treatment for colon cancer and some of the nutrition advice he's had since being diagnosed. So in this episode, we're going to cover the down and dirty when it comes to what science shows is the most important things to eat for colon cancer risk reduction and survivorship. If you're not familiar with me, in addition to being the wellness director for cancer services, I am known to many as the Cancer Dietitian. I'm the creator of cancerdietitian.com and a bona fide expert in oncology nutrition. Not only am I a registered dietitian, which, by the way, is a credentialed profession, I'm also licensed as a dietitian nutritionist in the state of North Carolina and a board certified specialist in oncology nutrition for over 12 years. And I don't tell you this just to impress you with all my credentials. I actually start many of my classes this way because I find that a lot of people don't know who to trust for nutrition information. It seems that everybody has an opinion on food, and a lot of people seem to think that if they read it on the internet, then it must be true. Or, as you'll hear from our guest later in this episode, just because it's on a Facebook video doesn't make it true, or just because it's on a Netflix documentary doesn't make it true. But I'm getting away from the point here. It's not just my training, which is why you should trust me. I might have an expert opinion, but you should be able to find the information that I talk about backed up by solid evidence-based organizations. So for much of the information we're going to talk about today, I'm utilizing the American Institute for Cancer Research. They are a national nonprofit that focuses their efforts on funding research specifically on nutrition, physical activity, and cancer. And they're one of the few organizations where their sole focus is on lifestyle and cancer. Other great organizations to get evidence-based nutrition and cancer information from includes the National Cancer Institute and the American Cancer Society. And generally, all three of these groups are going to be saying similar things. Educational institutions are good places too. But the thing that I like about the American Institute for Cancer Research, known as AICR, is that they have great information that brings it down to a very understandable level. And so today we're going to focus on their colon cancer recommendations. So to help you understand nutrition recommendations, it's important that you know that one study doesn't necessarily give us a final answer on things. So you might see headlines in the news because people like to report on nutrition information, but a lot of times they're just reporting on one single study. And honestly, if it's a study that's done in a petri dish or an animal, it's not something that's applicable to us as humans. The point of doing research in petri dishes or laboratories or animals is to inform future research interests. So it's not that it's worthless information, it's just that it's useful for researchers when they're going forward and designing trials. Once we get to a level of studying humans, with randomized control trials, that's when the data is worth considering. So when organizations like the AICR give evidence-based recommendations, these are actually the strongest evidence of all. And for my clients, that's where I recommend that they really focus their energy and that they build sort of the base on those recommendations. And then they can add things on top, of course, depending on what works for them. But it's important that we key in on what these evidence-based recommendations are, because they're not just based on one or two studies. An evidence-based recommendation means that enough well-designed studies were done showing the same consistent results that we feel confident in making a recommendation. So when I'm working with my cancer survivor clients, that's, of course, where we want to stick to. And today, we are going to really focus on the ones specifically around colon cancer. All right. So I always encourage people, try not to get distracted by all the rabbit trails that people want to send you on, because typically when people are advertising, or maybe not even advertising, but they're kind of promoting some way of eating that they've read in a book or they've seen on a documentary, they are typically following someone who's selling a product. So when they're making money on it, there's a little bit of a conflict of interest there. So now that you know where I get these recommendations from, it's important you know what they actually are. So this is what the AICR says they have convincing evidence around regarding nutrition and colon cancer. So key findings on food and physical activity for colon cancer is, first of all, eating whole grains and foods containing fiber lowers risk. Consuming processed meats and high amounts of red meat is a cause of colorectal cancer. Now, when we say cause, it means increases risk a certain percentage. So it's not like all of a sudden you eat a piece of red meat and you grow cancer. It's really about how much you're exposed to that risk. But we do have evidence showing processed meats and high amounts of red meats influencing risk and increasing risk for colon cancer. Drinking 2 or more alcoholic drinks daily is an increase in risk for colon cancer. And then daily moderate physical activity reduces risk of colon cancer. So that's the evidence. And I know that there has been some talk more recently around red meat and how much you should have and whether you should worry about it. I think with the AICR guidelines, when it comes to red meat, the limit is 18 ounces a week or more is where we see an increase in risk. So 18 ounces a week or less is perfectly fine to include in moderation. And then with processed meats, we just want to minimize our intake. So some people will tell me, they really love bacon. So how often is okay? I would encourage you to think about, we would say you eat it rarely if it's like once a month. I say it's a habit if you do it 3 times a week or more. So you want to kind of pay attention to how often you're having it. And then the other thing that you want to know regarding cancer risk reduction recommendations is that the AICR has an overall recommendation. So their recommendations are to be at a healthy weight, be physically active, eat a diet rich in whole grains, vegetables, fruit, and beans, limit consumption of fast foods and other processed foods that are high in fat, starches, or sugars, and limit consumption of red and processed meats. Limit consumption of sugar-sweetened drinks and limit alcohol consumption. Do not use supplements for cancer prevention because you want to aim to meet your nutritional needs through diet alone. And then for mothers, we encourage breastfeeding. And after a cancer diagnosis, our recommendation for cancer survivors is to follow these same recommendations for cancer risk reduction. And so what we see is that when you follow these recommendations, it's likely that you will reduce your intake of salt, saturated fat, and trans fat, which honestly is the way that we want most people to consume a healthy diet anyway, that it helps prevent other non-communicable diseases. So I think that the most important thing that you can take away from this is the things that you need to make sure you're doing more of. That's where I spend a lot of my time as an oncology dietitian in the wellness area of cancer survivorship and risk reduction, is really getting people to understand that including more fruits and vegetables, eating beans, nuts, and seeds on a daily basis, having whole grains as much as possible is the basis of a healthy diet. That doesn't mean that you have to exclude things like meats or red meats. It's just a matter of you need to make sure you have enough of those plant foods to provide your body with the tools that it needs to function at its best. And also, as the complement, is making sure that you include lots of physical activity in ways that you enjoy. And it doesn't have to be all at one time. So the typical recommendations are 30 minutes a day or 150 minutes a week. And that could be in 10-minute bouts. And it doesn't have to be real intense activity. But I always encourage people to find something that feels good to you, that you really enjoy doing, and figure out how to incorporate that into your daily life on a regular basis. If you're getting that physical activity, if you're getting lots and lots of plant foods that aren't real processed, then some of these other things will follow along with it. And so I prefer to focus on the positive things that you can do more of when it comes to cancer risk reduction and healthy survivorship than to keep some kind of list of all the things you're not allowed to do. So now that you're updated on the evidence regarding nutrition, physical activity, and colon cancer, I want to introduce you to a friend of mine who's going to share about his experience with colon cancer and specifically around people offering nutrition advice and how he handles that and how he sticks to focusing on what the key recommendations are to include into his day. I am here today with Tommy Mitchell, who was diagnosed with colon cancer in 2014 at the age of 31. His daughter at the time was 1, and he has since had a son with his wife. And so we are going to talk today about his experience, especially when it comes to nutrition advice, which is really fun. So we've already talked about what the current evidence-based guidelines are regarding colon cancer risk reduction and survivorship, but I think it's kind of interesting to hear hear from the patient perspective as to where do people get advice and what kind of is the wackiest advice? Because that's what I hear as an oncology dietitian. I hear a lot of people who tell me, is this true? Someone told me this. And sometimes I think, like, where did that come from? So, Tommy, tell me first about the worst piece of nutrition advice you ever got.
I would say some of the worst advice I've been given, in my case in particular, one of the big struggles I've had during treatment is maintaining weight. Mm-hmm. And so I hear every once in a while that I should try fasting during treatment because it helps the chemo be more effective.
Yeah. So who, without, putting everyone out there, but like generally, who was it that might have recommended fasting for you?
Typically, it's from acquaintances.
Like real life people you know?
People I know in real life.
Okay.
Yeah. Not necessarily close friends, but people I know.
Yeah, and in the South we say bless their hearts.
Yes.
They're just trying to help.
Sure.
Who knows? They read somewhere about fasting being good, but that's kind of ridiculous when we think, hey, nutrition is really important, and getting enough nutrition in this case is what we needed to focus on. So that's pretty funny. I have written on intermittent fasting because that's sort of a fad. And so anyway, interesting. What other kind of wacky advice have you gotten?
I've gotten advice about different diets I should try. Mm-hmm. I've been told to try every fad diet that's going on right now.
Because these people are suggesting that it will help?
Yes. It'll either help me feel better or it'll cure the disease. So I've been told I need to go vegan. I've been told I need to try the ketogenic, cut out all the carbs, all of that.
And do they ever provide you with any kind of evidence?
Yes. Facebook videos.
Oh, that's an interesting qualification for evidence or science.
Occasionally someone will send me something that sounds legitimate.
Maybe somewhat believable. Okay.
Right.
So tip out there for all you listeners, Facebook videos don't count as scientific advice.
Right.
In case you didn't know.
Yeah. One of the silliest bit of advice I've got one time was about eating maple syrup all the time.
Oh.
Because there was a genuine research study that showed in a laboratory that maple syrup has anti-cancer properties for colorectal cancer.
Okay.
But it was in a laboratory setting.
Yes.
In Petri dishes, not taking spoonfuls of maple syrup.
Right.
Every day.
If we could only just get the cancer out and stick it in a Petri dish and treat it there, then
that'd be great.
Yeah, that would be really handy. Yeah, so I get a lot of people, usually they're suggested some kind of miracle cure like that, and not thinking through the fact that, hey, you know what, if that study was done with cells in a Petri dish, that's not really how the human body functions. Like, hey, I would love it if there was some kind of magic miracle cancer cure out there. Like, I'm not just some kind of cynic.
Right.
Like, we all want that to be, but until we have enough evidence to prove that it works, and you kind of need it to be proven in an actual human.
Exactly.
Before you can even think that it's going to help. Although, I guess eating maple syrup's likely not going to harm you.
No.
It tastes delicious.
It's wonderful.
It's good on pancakes. So if the order is to eat pancakes with maple syrup on a regular basis,
Yep.
all right, I'm okay with that. So how about, we talked some about people getting advice from Netflix documentaries.
Yeah.
So what were some of the ones that were recommended to you?
The different documentaries that I've been recommended would be one called Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead, which was about juicing.
Okay.
About only drinking fresh squeezed fruit and vegetable juice for a certain amount of time to heal the body.
So you watched it.
I did watch it. And it was a good movie.
Very entertaining.
It was entertaining. It was interesting to see. I was happy that it seemed to work for the gentleman in the movie. I don't think it's for everybody.
Yeah. So you didn't watch the movie and then go on a 30-day juice fast?
No, I did not run out and buy a juicer. I did not.
Although I do know people who have tried that. Usually I tell people smoothies are better because they have the whole food.
Right.
But yeah, that's one of the common myths is, somehow juices are like concentrated fruits and vegetables and somehow that's going to be magical.
Right.
And let's see what else. Have you watched like Forks Over Knives?
I have not.
Like the person that recommended vegan, did they give you a book or?
No, most of the time it's a flyby advice.
Oh, okay.
It's hey, you should try this, or have you tried this?
As if that's going to be the answer.
Right. Or, hey, you should try being a vegan. It's better for you.
Was that person actually a vegan?
No.
Oh, okay.
No. Sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah.
Not that particular person, but no.
Yeah, so interesting because I did watch Forks Over Knives, and then there was another documentary that was also, so Forks Over Knives is funded by an animal rights organization, and they promote a vegan diet, and they push it in the movie with connections to cancer. And then What the Health is another Netflix documentary that is funded by animal rights groups, and it pushes a vegan diet. And it's funny because I have a friend who's also an oncology dietitian, and she and her husband watched it. And like the entire time she said she was laughing because some of the claims they made were just not how the human body works. And knowing nutrition, she just thought it was amusing that they were saying these things that weren't true. But her husband's experience as someone who doesn't have training in health, he's an engineer, is that he was like very anxious and he was responding with like worry. And he made her stop watching it because he was like, I can't take this, because every time he'd have to ask her like, is that true? And then she'd have to explain why it wasn't true. And he found that it was just making him more anxious. So it sounds like you're actually able to watch them and see the entertainment without feeling overwhelmed by the information.
Yeah.
I have had a client come in after watching one questioning whether eating yogurt was the reason that she had cancer. And I was like,
I haven't heard.
Because it's an animal food. You know, she was sort of guilted over it by this movie. So I'm like, people like that, they need to not watch things. Because also, FYI, like Facebook videos are not, science. Documentaries on Netflix are not scientific studies.
No.
I think sometimes people think that they're interesting, but usually they're based on only one perspective or one research study. Forks Over Knives was really only about one epidemiological study, and so it wasn't the best evidence, which is why I point people to evidence-based recommendations, because they've looked at all the studies that have ever been done to see where the consistency is, and in humans. That's the other helpful piece. All right, so you have come to some of my classes. I've seen you in classes and on social media, so
yes.
Tell me, because I don't remember how you got connected with like the Cancer Dietitian information.
Sure. After my diagnosis, it was recommended that we come to Cancer Services. We also have a family friend who works here as well. And so between the two of those things, we met you, and we just got connected that way. And then when I found out you were having your classes, I signed up because I wanted to learn.
Cool. And so you got pretty informed early on.
Yes. I was fortunate.
Yeah, helpful. So then was that information helpful when people came with wacky advice that you felt like, okay, you could tell it wasn't legit?
Yes. I would say having solid, backed up information helped kind of weed out the silly information where you get the little gut feeling that that just seems odd.
That doesn't sound right.
Right. And normally when someone gives me weird advice, it usually takes 2 minutes to look it up. And 9 times out of 10, you find that it's just wrong.
Right.
Silly. It takes less time to disprove it than it took to get the advice in the first place.
That is interesting. So you just do a quick search.
Sure.
If you feel like maybe I'll look into this.
Right.
Quick search, and then you don't find it on legitimate sites, or like you find legitimate sites that just basically say, nope.
Yeah, one of the two. And typically a lack of legitimate sites just rules it out from the start.
Gotcha.
Case in point, the maple syrup thing I talked about earlier. When someone sent me it was on Facebook and it was a video. And so I Googled it, and there was the actual research study that came up. And the whole research paper was on there. So I read it.
Oh.
And so that's how I found out that, yes, there's the tiny kernel of truth in there.
Right.
But it wasn't actually in people. It was in the laboratory setting.
Yes. Okay. Wow. That's very smart. So here's another good question. How do you, like, when people give you this advice, how do you respond to them? Like, in, I don't know, helpful ways to get them to stop talking, or?
Right. It depends. It depends on the situation, and it depends on the person. Mm-hmm. If it's someone that I actually have a relationship with, a family member or a friend, I tend to be a little more nice about it while still doing my best to just stop it. So I'll say something along the lines of, "Oh, I've read that before, I've seen that before." I mean, 5 years I've seen a lot. So
yes.
I'll either respond with something like that, "Oh, I've read that," or "Thanks, but I'm not interested."
And they respond?
Usually it's "Oh, okay." If it's something on social media, 9 times out of 10, I just ignore it.
Okay. Don't even.
I just don't respond. If somebody,
Gotcha.
if I'm tagged in something or somebody sends me a message, a lot of times at this point, I don't even respond.
Okay. That's a good idea. I'm going to have to remember that.
And it's more effective in those situations. No response at all is more effective
than trying to get into some kind of back and forth.
Yep.
Good advice. So I think sometimes, like what I see when people start to follow maybe some of these really restrictive or I guess more questionable type of diets, is that it often can ruin their quality of life. So like I've seen when people do juicing for like a month, they can't spend meals with their friends and family. They're spending all their time in the kitchen juicing. They don't feel well because they're not adequately nourished.
Right.
And so basically like they're trying to achieve better health, but their methods of getting that are basically ruining their quality of life. And none of us knows how much time we have left. So why am I going to waste? Like, to me, I feel like I want to spend each and every day doing the things that I love. And there are people who are like, well, I don't care how bad, processed meat is for me. If I can't, like, life is not worth living if I can't have bacon.
Right.
And I completely respect that we should know, like, what gives life to each of our days. And you balance between like what is the risk and all of those things. So I think it's really important for people to recognize that. So for you, what are some of your favorite soul foods, or like what are the things that have sort of given you quality of life and that doesn't have anything to do with their nutritional value?
Right. So for me, one of my chemo day traditions where I treat myself is on the way home from treatment, I've still got all of the meds going where I actually feel decent before the slump hits. So typically on the way home from chemo, I'll stop and have Chinese food, or I'll stop on the way in and have breakfast, something that tastes good. And then it's just sometimes you just have to treat yourself. Mm-hmm. So if there's a day where, I don't necessarily feel that great, and something just sounds good. Yeah. And I haven't been able to eat a whole lot, well, we'll just make it happen.
Yeah. So, like, what things have you had that kind of major?
So, for me, growing up here in the South, it would be, like, Mom's fried chicken.
I know. I always think of mac and cheese for some reason. That's, like... the ultimate soul food. Yeah. Which everyone is catching on to because Panera and Chick-fil-A and whoever else is now offering mac and cheese.
Yeah. Yeah.
So cool. And it's great that you're able to like get a good meal in after chemo. I think that you have to maximize when you're feeling well, especially when it comes to nutrition,
right?
Because it's hard to force yourself to get something down when you just don't feel like it, or it's like just going to come back up. So when you feel well, getting that in there is really important.
And sometimes we have to plan it.
Yes, ahead.
Like knowing I have to get Chinese on the way home from chemo because in a couple of hours I will be miserable.
Yeah.
So.
Right. Think ahead.
Exactly.
So on those same kind of lines, have you had to deal with any challenges in getting good nutrition or physical activity in throughout treatments or?
Yes, absolutely. With chemo, a big challenge is just feeling bad, feeling nauseous. And it's harder to make good food decisions when I feel bad. It's hard to get, especially like good nutrition foods. They're harder to get down when I don't feel that well. And then physical activity is difficult due to fatigue, or my chemo causes nerve pain a lot. So it's more difficult to do physical activity. So those are some of the challenges that I have.
So doing them when you feel well.
Yes.
Do you like physical activity?
I do.
So that helps. For some people who don't like it, it's like they could feel well and they still don't want to do it, you know?
Right.
So when you feel well, you can figure out like some way to it and you like
something
it.
to do. And then one of the ways that I kind of get around that is doing physical activity in a different way. So if I'm at home and I'm not feeling that well, and I know I need to do something, I'll try and do things around the house. You get a good number of steps in vacuuming.
Yes.
You get a good amount of movement in if you're just folding clothes, doing laundry, just doing things around the house, and it kind of gives you that double sense of satisfaction that I did something, but actually got something accomplished too.
Yes, and you can see it.
And you can see
your pile of laundry folded.
Exactly.
You see your carpet cleaned up.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's really good, because sometimes people will do, like if they can't get up, then they might do seated exercises, or even just walking around the couch or up and down the stairs is something, and something is better than nothing.
Exactly.
And generally you feel a little bit better afterwards. And then, so from nutrition, you mentioned weight management, so not losing too much weight.
Right.
Did you work with the dietitians at the hospital or no?
Some, yes.
Okay. So most people, FYI, most people have access to a dietitian at their cancer center, but not everyone knows that there's one available. So kudos to your medical team for making sure that you had access to it.
I've been very fortunate with my medical team. That's true.
So oncology dietitians, when people are not able to maintain weight as easy, we kind of focus very much on calories and protein. Is that the strategy?
Yes.
Okay. And so did you find things that worked like during those times?
Yeah. So interesting. One of the first suggestions is always Boost or
some kind of nutrition drink. Yeah.
Well, those upset my stomach.
Okay.
So I can't drink those because they're counterintuitive. And so it became let's figure something out. And the big push was, like you said, make sure I'm staying hydrated, drinking plenty of water, make sure I'm getting a good amount of protein. And so we figured things out to get those calories in.
Yeah.
Sneak them in where we can.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Did you make your own shakes or just figure out foods that worked for you?
We mainly just figured out foods that worked. So a lot of like nut butters. Yeah. I need a snack, spoonful of peanut butter. Something like that. If I'm having a smoothie for breakfast, I always add Greek yogurt to mine to get extra protein in.
Yep.
Things like that.
Cool. So then I've had some colon cancer clients who've had like surgeries, or they don't tolerate fiber.
Right.
Which is extra challenging, especially after we talk all about like, the evidence-based guidelines are to eat lots of fruits and vegetables and have beans and whole grains, which are all these like super high fiber foods. But then for some people who've had abdominal surgeries, and some people have ostomies, and it's like the fiber's just not going to happen for them.
Yes.
So have you had any challenges with that? And like, do you get around that? I mean, nut butters are actually sources of fiber.
They are.
So some of them bother other people more. I don't know.
Right. I've had some challenges with that, but honestly, I've been pretty fortunate with the surgeries and treatment. I haven't had too bad of a time tolerating.
Yeah.
I can't necessarily hit the number.
Yeah. Yeah.
that is
not getting to 4 cups, but
yeah. So I don't eat beans as often as I used to. And there are foods that I just cannot eat.
Yeah.
And some of that's just trial and error. You just find out that this food is off the list.
Yes.
Can't do
those anymore. And when I'm working with clients, I'm like, these recommendations are for sort of the general healthy population. So if somebody's gone through treatment and they tolerate it, then that's what we want them to do. But if they don't tolerate it, then we have to find other strategies. And that's perfectly fine. And so I try to make sure people don't feel like, I don't want them to feel guilty. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Where we give these recommendations, I don't want people to feel like, well, I can't do that. So somehow there's something bad about it. And so usually I'll tell people, actually that's like the one situation where I think juicing is helpful, is if people aren't tolerating fiber, then they could juice, and that would remove the fiber part, but still give them the rest of the fruit and vegetable, which will still be a benefit. But it is challenging. And I just want to say to anybody out there that if you cannot get the recommendations, that's okay, because there's lots of other ways that you can care for yourself and keep yourself healthy, that this isn't like everybody always has to do it all the time. So anyway, I think that's about it. Thank you so much for coming,
Thanks
for sharing your
having me.
perspective.
Thanks.
And we are looking forward to the Colon Cancer Coalition Get Your Rear in Gear 5K, which is in March. And we are grateful to the Colon Cancer Coalition for their funding of this podcast. Thanks for listening today to the Cancer Dietitian Podcast. As a reminder, this episode was sponsored by the Colon Cancer Coalition. You can find out more of my nutrition information at cancerdietitian.com, and be sure to follow me on social media. I'm at Cancer Dietitian on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Thanks, and see you later.